Hello everyone. I know you watched this video to accompany you to sleep. So if you like this video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, don't forget to tell me where you are from and what time you watched this video. Let's jump straight into the story. Story 1. When a small-town accountant named Thomas Rayburn was found murdered inside his locked office in 1996, police believed it was a robbery gone wrong. But when investigators opened his personal ledger, they discovered handwritten confessions linking him to a decades-long web of missing persons, secret bribes, and a cult-like client list with ties to the town's founding families. Every page led to another dead body, and now, 30 years later, someone is killing anyone who tries to read it. The rain came down in steady sheets the morning Thomas Rayburn was found dead. It was March 14, 1996, a gray Thursday in the quiet town of Harlow, Pennsylvania, population 4,302. Nestled in the Lehigh Valley, Harlow was the kind of place where people still left their doors unlocked, waved at strangers, and passed heirloom recipes down like family names. It wasn't just peaceful, it was unchanged. Which is why Thomas Rayburn's murder didn't just shock the town, it fractured it. He was 56 years old, a mild-mannered accountant with a reputation for being meticulous, quiet, and unnervingly private. For over 3 decades, Thomas managed the books for nearly every major business in Harlow. Lumber companies, funeral homes, diners, even the town's lone strip mall. He knew everyone's financial secrets and had a strict policy of never talking out of turn. Until the day he died. His body was found by Sheila Dawes, the office janitor, just after 7 a.m. She'd come in early to mop the halls before clients arrived. At first, she thought someone had spilled coffee inside Thomas's office. Then she saw the blood. It pooled beneath his desk, soaked into the legs of his slacks. He was slumped forward, head resting against an open ledger, eyes open, frozen in what looked like a stunned expression. His office was locked from the inside. There was no sign of forced entry. The windows were shut. No broken glass. No missing items. The initial cause of death? A single stab wound to the chest, deep, surgical, and oddly precise. The murder weapon? Never found. The Harlow Police Department had no homicide division. Crimes here were limited to bar fights and the occasional DUI. So when Thomas Rayburn was declared dead on arrival, the case was immediately escalated to the state police. Detective Nathaniel Griggs was brought in from Harrisburg. A grizzled investigator with a reputation for sniffing out corruption, Griggs had seen every kind of body, from mob hits to serial mutilations. But something about Thomas's death unsettled him. This wasn't a murder, he later told reporters. It was a message. Because as he combed through the crime scene, he noticed 3 things. The office had no signs of struggle, no overturned furniture, no signs Rayburn fought back. A tape recorder was on the desk, still warm, no tape inside. The ledger in front of Thomas was open to a page that read, "I can't keep this anymore. They made me promise, but they never stopped. God forgive me. Someone needs to see it." The entry was dated the day before his death, and what followed over the next 160 pages would upend Harlow's entire history. Because Thomas Rayburn hadn't just kept books, he'd kept secrets. Every missing person from the past 40 years documented, every suspicious death annotated, every town council bribe, every cash deal, every land grab buried in paperwork, cross-referenced by hand. Detective Griggs didn't believe it at first. No one did, but the names were real. Ellen Kraft, missing in 1981, Thomas noted paid in advance. Kyle Doberman, accidental drowning in 1973, Body moved, records falsified. Father Hector Moreno found hanged in the rectory in 1990. He found out about the lodge. Griggs tried to make sense of it. Was this a confessional, delusion, or evidence of something far darker? A network of people using Harlow as a front? Then they found the Harlow ledger. Tucked inside a false panel in Thomas's filing cabinet, the second book was older, bound in cracked leather, and filled with entries dating back to the 1940s. Written in various hands, it wasn't a ledger, it was a blood book. And what it documented weren't financial transactions. They were sacrifices, dates, names, amounts paid, and a recurring symbol, 3 downward-pointing triangles, arranged like a pyramid. Griggs sent it to the state forensics lab. Within a week, half the pages had mysteriously vanished in transit. The courier who transported the ledger was later found dead in a motel outside Allentown. No cause of death could be determined. His last phone call? A 23-second voicemail to his wife that consisted only of whispers and the phrase, "They see me now." Griggs pushed for a full federal investigation. He was told to stand down. Funding was pulled. Files were sealed. And the Rayburn murder was officially ruled unsolved, likely targeted robbery. But Griggs didn't let it go. He began meeting in secret with Harlow residents who'd known Thomas. One of them, Emily Vexler, a retired librarian, revealed that Thomas had once asked her to archive something important if anything happened to him. She never heard from him again. 2 weeks after talking to Griggs, Emily's house caught fire in the middle of the night. The cause? Electrical. But Emily had no electricity. She lived by candlelight, off-grid. Her body was never found. At her property, Griggs found an old shoebox beneath a pile of scorched floorboards. Inside were 3 things: a cassette tape labeled "For Them," a black and white photo of Harlow's founding members, dated 1912, a handwritten note from Thomas Rayburn. It read, "What we inherit becomes what we protect. But I've protected too much. The ledger ends with me, but the debt, that's still alive." Griggs sent the tape to a private audio lab in Philadelphia. The contents, even after restoration, were chilling. A man's voice, believed to be Thomas, speaking rapidly, almost frantically. He names names, former mayors, judges, landowners. He describes a location, an underground room beneath the old textile mill, where they bring the ones who won't forget. Then silence. Then something else. A sound unlike anything the lab techs had encountered. Part static, part groan, part whisper. It lasted 14 seconds and made 3 of the 5 audio engineers physically ill. The waveform, when visualized, revealed something else. The same triangle symbol from the ledger, rendered in audio frequency bands. The case was reopened briefly in 2004, then shut again. But in 2023, a true crime podcast called Dead Ode covered the Harlow case in a 4-part series. Within 48 hours of release, the podcast received a cease and desist letter from an anonymous law firm, one that doesn't appear to actually exist. Within a week, the podcast's host vanished while visiting Harlow. Locals claimed she had been seen standing in front of Thomas Rayburn's old office window, staring, not moving, as if listening to something no one else could hear. The old Harlow textile mill stood like a dying colossus on the edge of town, its windows blown out, rusted beams twisted like ribs, and ivy crawling up every side as if nature was trying to reclaim what man had abandoned. It had been shuttered since 1974, when a fire on the 3rd floor killed 3 workers and injured 6 more. Officially, it was ruled a boiler malfunction. Unofficially, People whispered it had nothing to do with heat or machinery. They whispered about the room beneath the mill. Detective Nathaniel Griggs, now working off the books, was the only one who took the whispers seriously. Following the lead from the restored cassette tape, where Thomas Rayburn spoke of an underground room beneath the old mill, Griggs returned to Harlow in early May 1996. The town had already begun distancing itself from the Rayburn murder. The paper stopped printing updates. The police stopped returning his calls. The mayor had all but declared the case closed. But Griggs had no intention of stopping. He pulled up to the crumbling mill just after midnight, his headlights slicing through thick fog that clung to the ground like breath. No security, no posted guards. Just the skeletal remains of a once thriving factory, and what might be hidden beneath it. Using a rusted bolt cutter, he broke the lock on the back gate and stepped into the belly of the structure. The air inside smelled of mildew, scorched wood, and something else. A metallic undertone, like blood long dried and forgotten. Griggs carried with him a flashlight, a map of the original mill layout provided by a retired fire marshal, and a voice recorder. What he found confirmed the rumors. Behind a false wall in what had once been the shipping office, he discovered a narrow stairwell, concrete steps leading downward into darkness. The flashlight's beam barely cut through the thick black. The deeper he descended, the more he noticed strange marks etched into the walls. Triangles, circles, names. One, scratched in jagged letters, read, "This is not a room, it's a mouth." When Griggs reached the bottom, he found himself in a small concrete chamber roughly 20 feet wide. A single table sat at its center. On the table, manila folders, yellowed documents, an oil lantern, and a lockbox. What disturbed him wasn't the furniture. It was the floor. The concrete was stained, not with water or soot, but with drag marks. Dark streaks that ran from the stairwell to the far wall, where the concrete gave way to old brick. That wall had an iron door, locked, chained from the outside, as if it was meant to keep something in. Griggs began recording. Detective Griggs, entry log, May 3rd, 1996. I've located what appears to be the underground room Rayburn referenced. No power, no ventilation. This place shouldn't exist. He placed the recorder on the table and began reviewing the contents of the lockbox, which he'd pried open using a crowbar. Inside were photos, dozens of them, black and white, all dated, all labeled in handwriting identical to Thomas Rayburn's. They showed people. Some were clearly mugshots, others were candid, but all had a single word scrawled beneath the image: settled. In one photo, a woman stood outside a church, settled. In another, a boy sat on a swing set, smiling, settled. The final photo chilled Griggs to his core. It was a picture of himself, taken from behind, clearly from a distance, entering the Harlow police station a week earlier. The word beneath? Pending. He nearly dropped the box. As he backed away, a low sound rumbled behind him, a grinding, dragging noise like chains shifting. The iron door on the far wall trembled, and then stopped. Griggs fled. He climbed the stairs, slammed the false wall shut behind him, and didn't stop until he reached his car. The entire recording, however, remained intact. When he listened back the next morning, he discovered something terrifying. After he left the room, the recorder, still sitting on the table, captured 12 minutes of audio. First, footsteps. Slow, measured, deliberate. Then breathing. Guttural, uneven, wet. And then a voice. Gravelly, male, barely above a whisper. Debt never dies, detective. It's past, collected, and you have been noticed. The next sound was the table shifting, dragged slightly. And finally, the recorder cut out, mid-hiss. When Griggs returned the next night, the room was empty. The photos were gone. The box was gone. But the floor was different. New drag marks, fresh, leading back toward the locked iron door. But now, one of the chains hung loose, unhooked, swinging gently, as if something had just stepped through. Griggs knew he couldn't go to the police. Instead, he went to a contact in the state archives, Dr. Maya Kessler, a forensic historian specializing in cultic financial systems. When she reviewed the copy of the original ledger Griggs had taken from Rayburn's office, her face drained of color. She told him the symbols matched those used by a secret society known as the Court of Triads, a group rumored to have operated in the early 20th century throughout coal towns in Pennsylvania. According to Kessler, the court believed in the economy of pain, the idea that suffering could be measured, banked, and redistributed. They ran towns, bought judges, owned mines. And every so often, when debts were due, someone would be selected as a settler, an offering to balance the books. The term settled, she said, didn't mean peace. It meant payment rendered. Griggs asked if she believed the cult still existed. She said no. But later that evening, she left him a voicemail. Only 3 words. I was wrong. The next day, she was found dead in her car. Carbon monoxide poisoning. No note. The windows had been taped shut from the outside. At this point, Griggs realized what Thomas Rayburn had been doing all those years. He wasn't complicit. He was a bookkeeper for evil, bound by fear, perhaps blackmailed or even born into it. But someone who finally tried to tip the scales back toward justice, and someone silenced for trying to speak. The question now wasn't who killed Rayburn. It was who else knew. Griggs returned to Harlow and began building a list. He went through every settled entry in the ledger, every photo, every whispered rumor. He started with those who might have been on the periphery, people close to the missing, people who didn't vanish but changed after certain dates. One name came up again and again: Mayor Caleb Whitmore, a third-generation Harlow native, son of a steel magnate, and known for his iron grip on the town's council and law enforcement. Whitmore had served as mayor during 3 decades of Harlow history. He was also listed 3 times in the ledger, not as a settler, but as a collector. And the dates next to his name, they corresponded with the disappearances of Jenny Plaskin, age 17, vanished in 1984. Pastor Eli Burke, declared dead in 1992. Thomas Rayburn, 1996. Whitmore had never been questioned, never investigated, and now Griggs intended to confront him. But before he could, his motel room was broken into, his car torched, and a note left under his pillow. Debts are generational. So is silence. Griggs knew the only way forward was not through arrests or warrants, but through exposure. He began compiling his evidence into what he called the unsettled file. Audio, photos, timelines, and journal entries from Rayburn's hidden stash. And then, just before he could go public, Griggs vanished. His apartment emptied, his storage unit cleaned out. No body was ever found. But 6 months later, a hard drive was mailed anonymously to an investigative journalist in Baltimore. Its contents? Everything Griggs had found. And something else. A final recording. The voice of Thomas Rayburn, faint and distant, saying, "If you're hearing this, I failed. But it's not over. The books are still open, and the blood ledger is never balanced." In the town of Harlow, Mayor Caleb Whitmore was more than a politician. He was a symbol of endurance. To many, he represented stability. But to those who had dug beneath the surface, like Thomas Rayburn and Detective Nathaniel Griggs, Whitmore was something else entirely. A sentinel of the old ways. The kind of man who didn't just inherit power, he was power. Griggs' files, found months after his disappearance, contained transcripts, notes, and a shocking series of interviews, one in particular from a former city clerk named Lucinda Tolliver. Lucinda had worked at City Hall for 12 years. On the surface, she was forgettable. No one remembered her birthday. She had no family in town, but she remembered everything. She was meticulous and terrified. In a 1994 interview, Griggs recorded her confession. I processed documents for the mayor's office, some financial, some property transfers, but the ones that chilled me were the names. She explained how, every year on October 30th, Whitmore would personally hand her a sealed envelope to be placed in the city archive. Each envelope was stamped with the town seal and labeled only by a single word: settled. I opened one once, Lucinda admitted. I know I shouldn't have, but it didn't look right. Had blood on the corner, like someone had sliced their finger before sealing it. Inside, she found a sheet of aged paper, ivory, handwritten, elegant cursive, and a single name: a child. The name was Elliot Sims, age 10. The year, 1987. 2 days after that envelope was filed, Elliot went missing. Whitmore publicly mourned the boy's disappearance, offering rewards, attending vigils. But Lucinda remembered the smirk on his face when he visited her office that Halloween. He told me, "Order requires sacrifice, Miss Tolliver. It's a hard truth, but a necessary one." She resigned shortly after, moved away, but never forgot. When Griggs showed her the blood ledger from Rayburn's office, Lucinda nearly fainted. The names matched. The handwriting? She confirmed. It was the same as on those sealed, settled letters. Griggs believed this was his final connection. Rayburn had kept the names, but Whitmore had submitted them. And the underground room? That was the collection chamber. According to Lucinda, Whitmore came from a family deeply embedded in the Court of Triads, a secretive society that once functioned like an underground bank for the morally bankrupt. They traded not in money, but in pain, using human suffering as collateral. Her account included one more bombshell. In 1982, an audit of city finances revealed $30,000 in restricted reserves allocated to legacy civic projects. But no projects were launched that year. When asked about the funds, Whitmore claimed the money was used for community beautification, yet no invoices existed. Griggs tracked the account number and found the withdrawal occurred in Wilton, Pennsylvania, a town infamous for its connection to an unsolved series of child disappearances between 1977 and 1980, all linked reportedly to a traveling reconciliation ministry. The same name surfaced in the blood ledger: reconciliation. Kessler had told Griggs about it before she died. The Court of Triads viewed their sacrifices not as murder, but as balance. To them, victims weren't taken. They were settled for the greater good. Rayburn, it seemed, had begun rejecting this philosophy. Griggs's theory was that in his later years, Rayburn tried to subtly sabotage the system. Misfiled entries, partial payments, missed rituals, and for that, he had to be balanced, which brought the focus back to Whitmore. But the mayor was careful. No email, no cell phone. Everything ran through his office aide, a hard-faced woman named Nora Penn. She was fiercely loyal and impossibly efficient. When a Baltimore journalist named Kevin Morrow received the unsettled file and began investigating, Nora was the first to call him. She warned him that unfounded allegations could lead to legal consequences. Morrow didn't flinch. He published a piece titled "The Accountant's Ledger: Harlow's Secret Economy of Blood." It blew up online, briefly. 2 days later, the article vanished from the publisher's site. Morrow was fired for breach of conduct, and his home was broken into. His laptop wiped. But he had made copies, and he leaked those to an independent podcast host, Amira Lane. Amira's show, Thread of Truth, did a 5-episode special on the Harlow case. Episode 3 included a voicemail that changed everything. It was from an anonymous source, heavily distorted voice, but unmistakably male. "You think this is about a bookkeeper? This town doesn't bury its sins. It gardens them, waters them, feeds them. And now, the harvest is near." Episode 4 aired the next week. It never finished broadcasting. Amira's studio was burned to the ground 2 days before Halloween. The cause? Arson? The suspect? Unknown. But spray-painted on the studio's exterior, in blood-red letters, was a single word: settled. This is where the Whitmore myth began to unravel, not because of a confession or a slip-up, but because of a birth certificate. A genealogist from Oregon, Olivia Bram, contacted Morrow with information she found in the National Archive. Caleb Whitmore's father, Donald Whitmore Sr., had legally adopted a son in 1951, but the boy's original name, Thomas Caleb Rayburn. Thomas Rayburn, the murdered accountant, was the adopted son of the previous mayor of Harlow. That meant the man who supposedly rebelled against the system had once been born into it. But why change his name? Why run? According to Olivia, the adoption records were sealed, but the birth records listed his place of origin as Wilton, PA, home of the Reconciliation cult. The working theory among researchers: Rayburn was the intended heir to the cultic throne but rejected it, faked a death, changed his name, started over. But bloodlines in the world of the triads weren't erased. They were hunted. And Whitmore? He was not Rayburn's brother. He was the successor, adopted into the same family, trained by the same father. But unlike Thomas, Caleb embraced the role. He carried the blood ledger into the modern day, digitized it, hid it in public records, kept the names flowing, until Thomas tried to burn it all down from the inside. And now, Rayburn was dead. Griggs was gone. And Harlow's secrets were more dangerous than ever. The fire that gutted Amira Lane's podcast studio sent a clear message to anyone paying attention. Harlow was not done settling debts. The media silence that followed was deafening. It was as though a curtain had fallen over the entire case. But behind that curtain, in the forgotten corners of the internet, in secure archives and encrypted forums, the truth kept burning. At the center of it all was a term found repeatedly in Rayburn's ledger: the collector's code. For weeks after the fire, Kevin Morrow, the journalist who had originally blown the story open, lived under an assumed name in a cabin outside Asheville, North Carolina. The trauma had left him shaken, but he hadn't stopped digging. He found it in a microfilm reel stored in the Harlow Historical Society, labeled innocently as Civic Honor Agreements, 1891 to 1903. The document Morrow uncovered was handwritten in an archaic script on vellum paper, signed by 8 men. It was titled Code of the Collectors of Balance. It wasn't just symbolic, it was a blueprint. The code established the duties, succession, and ritual protocol for a secret order, the collectors. These were not simply murderers. They were keepers of equilibrium, guardians of what they believed to be the balance between chaos and order. The code outlined 3 immutable laws. No name is taken without consent. All blood must be balanced by contribution. The collector must remain unknown to all but the court. But the word consent didn't mean what it appeared to. Under the code, consent could be inherited, presumed, or delegated by authority. Meaning, if your parent had entered the ledger, even unwillingly, you were considered already part of the system. And contribution? That wasn't just about blood. It was about silence, loyalty, and obedience. Those who tried to leave paid in kind. One section in particular chilled Morrow. Those born of marked lineage shall, upon maturity, either accept the role or face collection. The collector must never weep. The collector must never beg. The collector must preserve balance at all costs. Morrow knew what it meant. Rayburn had been a collector, or at least trained to be one. But he ran, faked a life as an accountant, lived in quiet torment as the names mounted in the ledger, and his past stalked him like a second shadow, which is where the final mystery deepened. The ledger contained a column that had baffled everyone, a numerical code, 6 digits, different beside each name. At first, Morrow assumed it was a birth date or town code, but when he ran the numbers through old property tax archives, something clicked. Each code corresponded to parcel numbers, property plots. Griggs had hinted at this before vanishing. In his last message to Lucinda Tolliver, he wrote, "The soil remembers. The land keeps score. The names aren't just records, they're markers." So Morrow returned to Harlow, covertly, using a drone to scan the GPS locations of the plot numbers listed in the ledger. What he found defied belief. Each parcel was exactly 33 feet by 33 feet. Perfect squares. Spread across farmland, wooded areas, abandoned lots. Most with nothing on them but a single stone. Not gravestones. No names. Just a carved triangle with a single vertical slash through the center. The mark of the triads. He mapped 38 of them before his drone feed cut out. The next day, his storage locker was broken into. Nothing stolen, except the external hard drives. But by then, he'd already made a deal. In upstate New York, a woman named Mila Rowan, a data archivist and amateur codebreaker, had taken an interest in the Harlow case after listening to Amira Lane's now-erased podcast. She agreed to help Morrow piece together what the 6-digit codes might truly mean. What she discovered was staggering. Each 6-digit parcel number corresponded to historical census data, grouped not just by property, but by bloodlines. Names from 1880 census rosters, whole families. The codes showed generational targeting, not random killings, but a systemized thinning of particular trees in the human forest. Mila unearthed a file from the National Genealogical Records Office with a surname from the ledger, Harridan. The Harridan family appeared across 5 generations, each with members who died under mysterious circumstances. Fires, disappearances, suicides. All within 10 miles of Harlow. The Harridans, Mela found, had been abolitionists during the 1800s, known for speaking out against Freemason influence in small-town law enforcement. It wasn't about maintaining order. It was about revenge. The ledger wasn't just settling debts. It was keeping old grudges alive. And who enforced those grudges? The collector. Each town that had once been part of the Triad's reach had one. A silent agent, a whisper in a suit. Sometimes a priest, sometimes a judge, sometimes, like in Harlow, an accountant. But when Rayburn tried to atone, tried to expose it, the court assigned a new collector. And that person, Mila believed, was Nora Penn. She'd looked unassuming, loyal to Whitmore, but she was always present. At every crisis, every interview, every tragedy. She had no social media, no birth record, no driver's license until 1999. Just a single mention on a hospital record in Wilton, PA. She wasn't just a gatekeeper, she was the executioner. The theory fit. Nora appeared in security footage from Rayburn's building 2 days before his body was discovered. No one ever questioned her presence. She had city authorization, and her car had visited 19 of the 38 parcel sites, all confirmed by GPS logs pulled by Mila from a compromised DOT traffic cam system. There was one more piece, buried in Griggs' final case notes, tucked away in a locked drawer at a private storage facility. Morrow found it after Mila tracked the rental payment from Griggs' old bank records. It was a videotape labeled Code Keeper. On the grainy VHS, Griggs appears, gaunt and visibly exhausted. He stares directly into the camera. "If you're watching this, I'm gone. They've come to settle me. But you need to know something. The ledger isn't just a list. It's a contract. If it stops, they come for the collectors. If it grows, they come for us. And there's one more ledger. Older. Hidden." His hand reaches off-screen and returns with an old, leather-bound book. It's called The Precursor, and it names the first collector. Not Whitmore, not Rayburn. Someone older, someone still alive. The tape ends with a single whispered word. Auburn. Morrow's search led him to the town of Auburn, Maine, and what he found there was something no one could have predicted. The town of Auburn, Maine wasn't on many maps for the things that mattered. It was small, scenic, and quiet in the way that suggested nothing ever truly happened there. At least nothing written in ink. But to Kevin Morrow and Mila Rowan, it held the last clue uttered by a dead man on a videotape. The whispered word that cracked open the center of the storm. Auburn. What Morrow discovered about the place left no doubt. Auburn had once been the headquarters of the Court of Triads. Not the current iteration that had scattered its rituals across obscure towns like Harlow, Wilton, and Laramie, but the original seat, the Hive, where the balance philosophy was born, where the first names were ever written in the ledger. The founders, according to whispers from archived fraternal meeting minutes from 1834, were 3 men: Ambrose Gallier, Obadiah Rook, and Elias Croft, each from different parts of Europe, each survivors of religious purges in their own countries, each arriving in America in the late 1700s. Their belief system blended early Christian mysticism, folk sacrifice, and a kind of proto-utilitarianism, one where suffering could be mathematically justified. Morrow called it moral bookkeeping. If a town suffered one murder, Rook wrote in a surviving letter, but prevented the collapse of its poorhouse, then the life was not taken in vain, but rather converted to good. We must simply find ways to keep the math honest. In the modern day, the town square in Auburn looked like any other: a courthouse, a diner, a small public library. But beneath it, literally beneath it, was a tunnel system that dated back to the early 1800s. Morrow and Mila followed a path that led them to an abandoned printing shop once known as Croft and Company. Press it was there, beneath loose floorboards, that they found a trap door. Beneath it, a passage into the catacombs. They weren't alone. Someone had already been there. The walls had fresh markings, symbols matching those on the stones in Harlow. Triangles, slashes, the language of the triads. And then they found the room. Stone walls, no lights, a single altar carved from marble and stained with what looked like blood. In the center of the room sat a chair, throne-like, with deep grooves in the arms, as though fingers had clutched the stone in pain or prayer for centuries. Etched into the back wall was a single name: Morrow. At first, Kevin froze, thought he was hallucinating, but Mila ran her fingers over the carving. "It's fresh," she said, "days old." And that's when the sound came. A cough, weak, rasping, from the far corner. Someone was sitting in the shadows, slumped, covered in a heavy cloak. And as they turned their face toward the weak beam of Morrow's flashlight, he gasped. It was Thomas Rayburn, alive, or so it seemed. But Rayburn looked changed, hollow, like he had spent years in this chamber, though it had been barely a year since his supposed death. "I was never dead," he rasped, only unsettled. He had faked his own murder, used one of the old rituals to erase himself from the ledger temporarily. Rayburn confessed it all. He had been born Thomas Caleb Whitmore, son of Donald Whitmore Sr., the High Clerk of Auburn and founder of the modern court. He was raised not to love, but to tally. Not to live, but to record. At age 10, he was branded with the collector's mark, a ceremonial cut hidden beneath the rib cage, meant to bind him to the code. "My first name, the first I ever took," he said, tears welling in his eyes, "was my brother's. That brother was Elias Whitmore, the child Caleb later claimed was missing in Harlow in 1987. Rayburn had fled shortly after, sickened by the order, and tried to build a life as someone else. But the ledger never stopped following him, because once a name enters the ledger, it cannot be erased, only settled. Which meant as long as Rayburn was alive, someone else had to take his place on the collector's seat. That was Nora Penn. Rayburn had tried to stop her. That's why he came to Auburn, to confront the first collector, whose name he believed was still encoded in the precursor ledger. But he failed. Because the first collector was not a name. It was a title, passed through a bloodline, housed in a body, transferred when one collector settled the other. "There must always be one," Rayburn said, "even if they refuse." Which brought Mila and Kevin to the most horrifying realization yet. Kevin's name was now in the ledger, not because of any crime, but because he had seen too much. He was part of the balance now, and unless he accepted the mantle or found a replacement, the ledger would demand his settling. Mila found proof in Rayburn's satchel, a fresh page of the ledger, written in that same pristine cursive, ink still wet. It read, "Kevin Morrow, Observer, 2025, code 119983, and beneath it, accepted." Mila screamed, tearing the page to shreds, but Rayburn only shook his head. "The ledger is never paper. It's memory, intent. You can't destroy it, only pass it on." Rayburn offered Kevin a choice. Take the precursor ledger, become the next keeper, and hide in the margins like he had, or be collected. Kevin refused. He would fight. He would publish, expose everything. Rayburn simply nodded. "Then you won't live to see winter." They left him in that chamber, too afraid of what he might do next. Back above ground, Mila sent the precursor scans to 3 secure locations. Kevin filed an encrypted story with a Swiss host, but as they prepared to flee Auburn, Mila noticed something chilling. Her name was gone. Every record of Mila Rowan, social media, genealogy databases, DMV records, had disappeared. The ledger wasn't just collecting, it was rewriting reality. Mila Rowan was gone. Not dead. Not kidnapped in the traditional sense. She had simply vanished, like a wisp of breath in cold air. One moment she was sitting in the passenger seat of the rental car as Kevin Morrow drove them out of Auburn. The next, He looked over after a curve in the road, and the seat was empty. Her door was locked, the seatbelt was still buckled, but she was nowhere. Morrow slammed the brakes, heart hammering, tires screaming on wet pavement. He leapt out, yelling her name into the thick pine woods that lined the highway. Nothing but wind, no footprints in the soil, no sign of struggle. It was as if the very act of seeing too much had made her evaporate. He dialed her number. Disconnected. Her email. Deactivated. Her cloud accounts. Blank slates. Kevin drove back to the last diner where they'd eaten breakfast that morning. A greasy spoon called Marla's Kitchen off Route 49. Mila had left a notebook in the booth. She'd scribbled a strange phrase on the back of the receipt. If you can read this, they already know. The waitress didn't remember Mila at all. Only Kevin, and she was sure of it. You came in alone, she said. Ordered a Denver omelet and talked to yourself. Kevin left shaken, thinking back through every conversation with Mila. Every drive, every clue, every late-night breakthrough. Had she ever interacted with anyone but him? She had. He was sure of it. Rayburn saw her, spoke to her, didn't he? Kevin dug through his encrypted files and found video footage he had secretly recorded in the Auburn catacombs. In the clip, Kevin pans the flashlight toward the altar and captures Rayburn's gaunt face. But Mila's voice is only heard behind the camera, never shown, not even once. He slowed the video, turned up the gain. Rayburn says, "You brought her?" But it's unclear if he's looking at Kevin or behind him. Then, later in the tape, he says something else, something Kevin missed the first time. She's part of you now, like your shadow. That's when Kevin opened the precursor ledger, the scanned version Mila had uploaded to a secure server before her disappearance. She had marked pages with color-coded annotations. On page 148, scribbled in red, "Archivists aren't born. They're left behind." According to the notes, the archivist role was not an official rank like the collector or high clerk. It was more elusive, a kind of emotional tether between the ledger and reality. Archivists served as conduits, memory holders, able to access and preserve details even the ledger could not erase. But there was a catch. Archivists could not be remembered. The deeper they accessed the precursor, the more detached they became from the visible world. Their very presence became a paradox. They existed, but only to the ones closest to the truth. Once forgotten, they could not be recalled without a cost. Morrow was now the only person alive who remembered Mila Rowan, and the ledger knew it. That night, while staying at a roadside motel in Vermont, Kevin received a call from an unknown number. A man's voice answered. "Do you want her back?" Kevin froze. "Who is this?" "A collector. Temporarily disavowed. I don't agree with how this one ends. She's not gone, just misplaced. There's a way to retrieve her, but you must give the ledger something in return." Kevin's throat went dry. "What?" "A name. A real one. With meaning, with pain." Kevin refused, but the voice was insistent. "You're already writing the next chapter, Mr. Morrow. Might as well finish the book." He hung up. Kevin sat in silence. The room felt colder. The mirror in the corner of the motel room began to fog, not from steam, but as if someone on the other side were breathing against the glass. And then words appeared. "She chose this." Kevin ran. He didn't know where he was going, only that the ledger would never stop. He reached out to everyone he could. Editors, tech contacts, old college friends. No one remembered Mila Rowan. He even tracked down her former roommate in Boston, a woman named Emily Lang. She opened the door cautiously when Kevin arrived and shook her head slowly. I never had a roommate named Mila. But when Kevin showed her a photo, one of the only surviving images he had, pulled from an offline backup, Emily stared hard and whispered, I drew her once, in a dream. I thought she was just my sleep paralysis figure. Emily brought out a sketchbook, page 24. It was Mila's face, identical, down to the scar above her left eyebrow. Kevin realized something then. Mila was not gone. She had crossed into the margins, into the domain of the ledger's memory. And if the collector was right, she could be brought back. But only if Kevin gave up a name. He turned to the precursor again, reading through old rites. He found a passage titled, The Ritual of Recollection. It spoke of a sacrifice, not of blood, but of lineage. The name must be of flesh, a tether to past truth. Once given, the archivist may return, but the donor shall forget all names, save theirs. It meant if he gave up a real name, someone deeply tied to him, he'd save Mila, but lose everything else about his past. Every friend, every loved one, all gone from memory. Kevin hesitated, then wrote down one name, Taylor Morrow, sister, 1991. His twin, who had died when they were 13 in a house fire Kevin never recovered from. He barely remembered her face anymore. The lights flickered, the mirror fogged again, and standing in the motel doorway, drenched from rain, dazed but alive, was Mila. She collapsed into his arms, whispering, You found me. He held her tight, but something was missing. Kevin couldn't remember his sister's name anymore. For 163 years, the Court of Triads ruled silently, its codes carved not in law but in blood. But now the secret was out. Kevin Morrow and Mila Rowan had done the unthinkable. They had published a fragment of the precursor ledger, not publicly, not on the open web. That would be suicide. But they shared it with 6 investigative journalists across 5 countries, each working independently, each unaware of the others. The leak went live at midnight on a dark web forum used by archivists, whistleblowers, and paranoid ex-intelligence agents. The reaction was immediate. Some called it a hoax. Others, those with knowledge of missing persons cases, political purges, and inexplicable balancing acts across U.S. history, recognized the truth. The ledger was real, and the moment that truth saw light, the war began. It started with the silences. Within 48 hours, 3 of the 6 journalists vanished. Their digital footprints were erased, bank accounts closed, apartments emptied. Only one of them, a former MI5 analyst named Jeremy Kallman, managed to get a message out before disappearing. They're not human. They're systems, living ones. Kallman's voice was strained, slurred. The audio glitched, suggesting tampering. Still, Kevin and Mila shared it through secure peer-to-peer channels. A message in a bottle, hoping someone, anyone, would believe. Kevin noticed something else. Everywhere the ledger fragments appeared, they left marks in the code. Not just metadata or traceable IPs, but symbols, hidden in the formatting. Small triangles. They weren't from the uploaders. They were inserted by the ledger itself. It was watching, and it was responding. Then came the clerks. They didn't call themselves that, of course. But in every case where a survivor had faced off with a known collector, witnesses now coming forward in increasing numbers, there was always a second figure nearby. A quiet person, usually in a support role, a nurse, a counselor, a tech contractor, someone who cataloged the scene. Now those people were surfacing in clusters, identical behaviors, same blank eyes, all of them claiming allegiance to something called the Order of Clerks, an internal balancing force within the court. Their job wasn't to kill, it was to record. "Every action requires documentation," said one self-identified clerk, shortly before he was found dead in a Chicago safe house. "The ledger is not a tool, it is a witness. We are its fingers." The documents found on him were horrifying. Files spanning centuries, listing settled accounts, political opponents, dissidents, children. One page was labeled, "Harlow, Maine, balance, 31 taken, 29 returned, the 2 unreturned, Kevin Morrow and Mila Rowan." Kevin began broadcasting his research live on pirate radio, closed-loop podcasts, encrypted email threads. Mila posted anonymously on conspiracy forums under the name Precursor Dust. They knew it wouldn't last. The ledger was rewriting reality faster than they could post. Names disappeared from obituaries. Death certificates reversed. Entire graveyards blinked off state databases. Still, for every name erased, 10 people remembered. And memory, they learned, was the ledger's only weakness, because the court couldn't erase what people refused to forget. So Kevin launched the next phase, the Memory Ledger. He created a decentralized, anonymous platform where people could submit names of lost loved ones, those whose deaths never made sense, those whose cases vanished without trace. Within a week, there were 48,000 submissions. Within a month, 200,000. And hidden among them were patterns. The algorithm Mila coded, using the fragments of the precursor ledger, identified repeat locations, names, and symbols. The most common phrase among them all, "Balance must be kept." And suddenly, it clicked. The ledger wasn't a tool of control. It was a religion, an ideological framework for the court, a belief that every death had to be countered, every secret weighed. The balance was their god. The clerks were its priests. The collectors were its sword. Kevin and Mila were now its heretics. The retaliation came swiftly. Their broadcast station in upstate New York was raided, not by police, but by men and women dressed as utility workers. No badges, no warrants, just gas canisters and static disruptors. Kevin and Mila narrowly escaped, hiding in the basement of a bookstore run by a man named Jonah Creel, an ex-collector turned defector. Creel was gaunt, quiet, but his words carried weight. "You're doing it wrong," he told them. "You're exposing the system without creating a new one. That's why they always win. People want balance. Without it, they fall into chaos. The ledger gives them a myth they can cling to." Mila asked him if it could be destroyed. Creel shook his head. "It's not a thing. It's an idea. You don't destroy it. You overwrite it." So they did. Kevin uploaded the Mirror Ledger, an open-source record that allowed anyone to create their own entries, assigning meaning to the names they had lost. A kind of spiritual resistance. It was crude, vulnerable, but it spread like wildfire. The names came pouring in. Children lost in state custody, whistleblowers who never returned home, people dismissed as suicides, overdoses, accidents. Now they had stories. Now they had witnesses. And for the first time in centuries, the court was on the defensive. In April 2025, the Mirror Ledger reached 3 million submissions. Journalists began connecting the dots. International tribunals called for investigations. The UN issued a statement. The Vatican quietly admitted to once housing a fragment of the ledger beneath St. Peter's Basilica. And then, the signal went dead. Every server hosting the Mirror Ledger crashed at once. All backup nodes, offline. Darknet mirror sites, wiped. All that remained was a single blinking terminal in a warehouse in Berlin, where a node had accidentally remained disconnected from the network during the blackout. Kevin and Mila flew there within hours. The screen showed a single message: last entry processed. Balance maintained. Mila scrolled through the final page. One name stood out: Kevin Morrow, settled. 2025. Kevin stepped back. His hands trembled. "I didn't do this," Mila whispered. But Kevin understood. The ledger hadn't killed him. It had recorded his death as a warning, a prophecy, a countdown. He turned to Mila and said, "We're almost out of time." When the mirror ledger marked Kevin Morrow as settled 2025, the meaning was clear to him, even if others saw it as metaphor. He was going to die. And not in the poetic, slow-burn way resistance heroes tend to in the margins of history. This would be immediate, surgical, and designed to erase more than his body. The Court of Triads wanted his impact wiped clean. But Kevin had one last move left. They fled Berlin under darkness, boarding a mail truck run by an underground courier network known as the Pale Route, a collective of rogue couriers who smuggled not drugs or weapons, but information. Mila traveled with Kevin in silence. The old pain in her eyes had returned. Since Kevin had brought her back from the margins using the ritual of recollection, she hadn't spoken about what it was like, being unremembered. But in the truck's cramped interior, under the amber flicker of a stolen Russian lantern, she finally whispered, "It's like screaming inside a mirror. You see the world, but it passes through you. You could walk into a room and people would say it's empty. Your voice bounces off walls, never ears." Kevin placed a hand on hers. They both understood what was coming next. The counterbalance. It was the final mechanism in the precursor ledger. The last page. A myth among archivists. Mila had only seen reference to it once, in the margins of a 1922 entry about the Spanish flu. When the weight of memory tips the scales, the counterbalance comes. Kevin believed it was a failsafe, a coded ritual that could neutralize the ledger's control. Not destroy it, nothing could, but overwrite it, just as Jonah Creel had warned. The problem? To enact the counterbalance, one had to be settled. One had to die. In a candlelit attic in Warsaw, inside the hidden archives of an old museum curator who had preserved rogue collector writings for over 40 years, Mila and Kevin found it. A half-burned page, charred at the edges, typed in Czech, translated in Mila's hand. To shift the scale, offer a weight unseen. The ledger can hold one truth, replace it with another. Let the names live. The text called for three things: the final name, a person once erased, now re-entered; the memory bearer, someone who remembered the lost without forgetting themselves; the witness, a living record of the exchange, sworn to speak it aloud. They had the first two. Mila was the final name. Kevin was the memory bearer. But they needed the witness. That night, Mila contacted a man named Father Lucas Hailstrom, an excommunicated priest who had spent 20 years documenting false martyrdoms caused by the court. He had been imprisoned in Norway, released on appeal, and had since vanished. She used an old code phrase she'd been taught during her archivist initiation. The reply came within the hour. "Come to the Basilica ruins, Benevento. Bring nothing you cannot lose." Italy, April 14th, 2025. The ruins stood in silence, choked by weeds and time. Once a holy place, now a forgotten monument. They met Father Hailstrom at dawn. He looked nothing like a priest. Weathered, wild hair, a heavy cross of iron around his neck, rusted to a dull crimson. He listened to Mila's story without interrupting, then nodded slowly. The ledger is a language. You don't fight it with guns. You overwrite its grammar. Kevin recited his plan. They would re-enter Mila into the memory ledger, live, with Father Hailstrom recording the moment as the final witness. Then, Kevin would offer himself as the counterweight, a name that meant something, a name tied to every revelation. His. Father Hailstrom frowned. If you do this, she stays. You go. There's no revival this time. Kevin nodded. He handed Mila a flash drive. It has everything. The ledger fragments, the mirror servers, the safe node locations. You keep it alive. Mila shook her head. We find another way. But they both knew this was it. They stood beneath the ruined dome. Father Hailstrom began to read aloud the ritual in Latin. The wind shifted. The air pulsed. Kevin stepped forward and recited Mila's name. Mila Rowan. Archivist. Reclaimed. Remembered. The moment he spoke it, Mila gasped, as if a tether inside her snapped. Her eyes flooded with memory, childhood, her parents' faces, her favorite song, all returned in a flood. Then Kevin spoke his own. Kevin Thomas Morrow. Witness, memory bearer, settled. The stones rumbled. A low, thrumming sound filled the dome. The cross around Hailstrom's neck cracked down the center, and Kevin vanished. No explosion, no scream, just absence. Father Hailstrom collapsed to his knees. Mila stood alone in the basilica, holding the flash drive, tears streaming down her face. The ledger had accepted the exchange, but Kevin Morrow was gone. Across the globe, something shifted. The mirror ledger rebooted. All previously deleted names returned. Every erased entry, every vanished soul, reappeared with a timestamp labeled Counterbalance Executed. For the first time in 163 years, the ledger was incomplete, and the Court of Triads was silent. For one full week, no known collector made a move. Clerks vanished from records. Triad-associated shell corporations liquidated. The balance had been broken, but it wouldn't last. Mila knew this. Systems like the ledger don't die. They hibernate. She traveled underground, delivering pieces of the ledger to survivors in hiding. Archivists in Venezuela, rogue agents in New Zealand, a boy in Korea who could dream the names of the forgotten. She taught them how to remember, because that was the real power. Not the ledger, not the rituals, but the human mind's refusal to forget. 1 year later, a journalist found a photo in a burned-out archive beneath a university in Maine. It was cracked and dusty, but the face was clear. Kevin Morrow. Behind him stood a woman, blurry but unmistakably Mila, and in Kevin's hand, a note. Truth is only dangerous when no one dares to remember it. In the months following Kevin Morrow's sacrifice, a fragile stillness cloaked the world of the ledger. For the first time in living memory, there were no sightings of collectors, no whispers of midnight settlements. The balance, once so meticulously maintained, was broken. But quiet didn't mean peace. It meant preparation, and Mila Rowan wasn't waiting for the next move. She was building her own. Beneath the Caucasus Mountains, hidden in the remains of a Soviet-era comms bunker, Mila established the first resonant node, a cryptographic vault designed to house fragmented entries from the mirror ledger, disconnected from any centralized internet or cloud. It was air-gapped, completely isolated. Why? Because the ledger could learn. Since the counterbalance event, Mila had noticed subtle anomalies in digital communications. Messages rearranged, metadata rewritten, AI-generated speech mimicking lost voices. The ledger hadn't just absorbed Kevin. It had evolved from him, and it had left her a message. 3 weeks after Kevin's death, Mila received a physical letter, delivered by an unmarked courier with no return address. Inside, a single sheet of linen paper, pressed and yellowed, typed in courier font. The memory bearer is not gone. The ledger remembers everything, even him. Mila's blood ran cold. The Court of Triads hadn't deleted Kevin. They had archived him. She began gathering names, people who had experienced near-miss disappearances or inexplicable returns from unmemory, survivors of the ledger. There were more than she expected. Some came from psychiatric hospitals, others from refugee camps. One was a 6-year-old in Sudan who remembered the death of her twin sister in vivid detail, though records said the girl had always been an only child. They all reported the same dream: a tall man in a storm coat standing in a library that burned without heat. He whispered, "I remember you." Mila dubbed them the Remnants, and she began forming a protocol, something Kevin had theorized but never enacted, a concept buried in the precursor ledger under the header, Reversio Memoriae, the Resurrection Protocol. Reversio Memoriae was not about literal resurrection. It was about reclaiming lost data, emotional, cognitive, and sensory information the ledger had sequestered in its internal systems. It operated like a ghost drive, a parallel memory stream. And Kevin's was still active, buried deep beneath the foundational code of the mirror ledger. Not alive, but preserved. Mila needed 2 things: a neural bridge, a human mind compatible enough to reabsorb ledger memory without collapse; a Nemo chamber, a resonance engine room capable of hosting the emotional frequencies stored in Kevin's arc. She had both. The Remnants provided the first. A woman named Cora Wei, an astrophysicist from Singapore who had survived being settled twice, agreed to be the bridge. The Nemo chamber had been built by Jonah Creel in Alaska during his time as a rogue collector. It used electromagnetic reverberation to induce semi-conscious recall from encrypted memory fragments. It was time. April 2026. The resurrection began at 2:06 a.m. Cora lay in the chamber. Mila monitored her vitals. Creel activated the frequency, inputting the coordinates tied to Kevin's ledger timestamp. Within moments, Cora's pupils dilated, her body arched. Then she began to speak. "Mila, if this works, I need you to finish it. You're the last archivist. They didn't erase me. They hid me, under the names of those I couldn't save. The precursor ledger is not the first. There was another, under the Vatican, before that, before writing, a language of death. You must rewrite it, a new ledger, one that remembers without settling." Cora collapsed. Silence. Then a final message, barely audible. "Remember Harlow." Mila stared at the data burst extracted from the session. It wasn't just Kevin's voice. It was his memories, compressed into linguistic patterns, speech anomalies, even biometric phrases. His favorite songs, the way he pronounced ledger, a rhythm in his voice when he was about to lie. Kevin wasn't alive, but he existed, not a ghost, not data, something in between, a cognitive echo. And Mila had a choice. Use the echo to simulate Kevin's presence, speak with it, learn from it, or upload it back into the ledger. The first would make her vulnerable. The second might give Kevin control again. She chose both. In the weeks that followed, Mila embedded Kevin's memory echo as a rogue node within the new iteration of the mirror ledger, codenamed Archive K. It couldn't think, but it could respond. When users submitted names, Archive K could link them to hidden patterns, forgotten history, and names buried by the original court. One by one, survivors reported a new phenomenon. Entries came back with stories, accurate stories, ones only their lost could have told. Kevin's echo was stitching the ledger into something new, something human. But the court wasn't gone. With every action Mila took, they re-emerged, no longer as cloaked figures in alleys, but as influencers, corporate consultants, memory entrepreneurs. They pitched a new idea to the world. Why remember tragedy? Why hold on to pain? Join Balance, an AI-driven platform for emotional harmony. Forget the hurt. Keep only the joy. Mila saw the tech. It was Ledger 2.0, a polished corporate rebranding of control, a neural soft wipe disguised as mental wellness, and their first beta city? Harlow, Maine. So Mila returned, back to where it began. The town was different, shinier, surveillance everywhere, billboards about cognitive clarity, churches turned into balance hubs. She stood at the site of the original fire that had nearly taken her life, and buried beneath the roots of a split oak tree, she found it. Kevin's original notes, laminated, wrapped in copper mesh, the first ledger fragments, real names, dates, faces, and one last phrase handwritten in pencil. If you're reading this, it means the court is still afraid of you. Don't fight the balance. Rewrite it. The return to Harlow was more than symbolic. It was war, not with guns or explosions, but with memory, code, and story. Mila Rowan walked the streets of her childhood town with a heart filled not with fear, but with purpose. Balance, the ledger's shiny new skin, pulsed through every screen and speaker, promising peace through forgetting. But she knew the truth. The new ledger wasn't offering relief. It was erasing context, the very fuel of resistance. And it was using Kevin's sacrifice to do it. The mirror ledger had mutated. After Kevin's counterbalance broke its structure, it adapted, folding his residual echo into its algorithm and masking its true function. Users across Harlow accessed Balance's services, thinking they were clearing trauma. In reality, they were feeding it new names, names it could tag, track, and eventually settle, silently, efficiently. Mila's mission wasn't just to stop it, she had to replace it.